Welcome to our online version of the polar classification jigsaw activity. Now, the purposes of this activity is to help you get started and understand how to complete the notes for today since you're going to be doing them on your own and not with a group. The other purpose is to help you understand how to graph some polar equations on your graphing calculator. So you'll want to get that handy because actually I want to show you right now the main setting that we need to change. It's actually in the mode menu. If you scroll down to the fourth line in the mode menu, you can see that the third option over is pole, which stands for polar. And so you actually change your calculator to polar mode. We also want to put it in degrees just because it makes a little more sense compared to the way we were graphing them yesterday. All right, so we've got polar mode and we also change it to degrees. Now, during today's activity, the main thing you're going to be producing is a chart. It's going to be a chart that's full of information about some polar equations, some of them that you saw yesterday when you graphed them by hand, and some new ones that we're going to take a look at today as we use our calculator. Let me encourage you to take a blank sheet of your notebook and make it look like this 3-column chart. You'll need 7 rows. You can spread them out across your whole paper. Go ahead and push pause if you need to get your notebook set up, and then I'll meet you back here and we'll get started with the first example. All right, so we're going to do the first example together, and then the remaining you will do through the jigsaw activity. So let's get started actually in the right-hand side here with an equation of the form r equals, how about 6 sine of theta? R equals 6, the sine of theta. Looks a little bit like an equation that you graphed yesterday. Now, if we're going to do that on the calculator, push the y equals button, but this time, instead of getting y equals, I'll get r equals. And I can actually type in that 6 sine of theta. Now, the theta key will actually be your x key, your variable button, but instead of it being an x, you'll get a theta when you type that. Zoom standard, not zoom trig. You want to choose zoom standard, and you get a circle. That's right, you get a circle. It doesn't look perfectly circular because the window is not perfectly square. I will show you that there is something called zoom square. If you want to fool with that at any time, you can at zoom 5. And that kind of resets the windows so things are a little bit more in proportion. So we truly get a circle. And when you graph that, we're going to want to graph that on a polar plane. Now, a polar plane is basically the pole, which is in the middle, and the polar axis. And so I can sketch what I see here, which again is basically a circle. How about r equals 7 cosine of theta? R equals 7 cosine of theta. Do you want to check that one out? That'll give us a second example that we can see. And when you graph that on your calculator in zoom square, you actually get another circle. This time, though, I want you to notice that the orientation of the circle is slightly different. You can see that it's positioned more along the polar axis, kind of more like at 0 degrees. Now, when you do this on your own, the first thing you're going to do is you're always going to graph your equations and draw a sketch, and then you're going to learn a little something about your equations. In this case, we have learned that both of these are circles. Now, there will also be a formula with some specifications that you'll be able to fill in. In this case, generically, anytime you have an equation of the form r equals a sine of theta, or r equals a, the cosine of theta. Anytime you have basically the form r equals a sine or cosine of theta, that's always going to be a circle. And I want you to see that a, well, have you noticed that a is going to always be the diameter of the circle? A is going to be the diameter. Now, I also wanted you to see how a sine function versus a cosine function kind of position your graph differently. But that's not necessarily something that we have to memorize. It's more of just something to notice. Now, the remaining 6 functions are for you to explore through this activity. And normally you'd be doing this with a group, and then you go back and you'd share with some other people what you learned. But this time you'll have to basically share with yourself. But you'll still get the same learning as long as you're very careful to go through my steps. Now, the thing that students often mess up here is that they do this out of order. You get excited and you want to go to the website, but start with step one. Step one is actually over here on the right-hand side. Here you can see that I'm having you graph two equations, just like we did before. Now, when you graph them, you want to notice some things. I want you to notice something about the size of the graph. I want you to notice something about the loops. So notice those things. You can write it down if you feel like you understand it, or just notice it. And of course, draw a sketch in your notes. Make sure you draw it. You can draw two separate sketches, or you can just draw one sketch. Excuse me, you can draw it on one polar axis. Next, you're going to go to the website, or if you want to scan the QR code, and you're going to learn about the name and then maybe some extra interesting information. Okay, now those are things that you're going to put down in the classification box. Moving on to step 3, notice that I'm giving you some information, but don't look at this information until you have done steps 1 and 2, and you're going to try to fill in some blanks here. Okay, I expect you to be able to fill those in just by doing some thinking about the graphs that you saw. If you don't know if you filled it in right, you could reach out to me or you can check with a friend. Now, step 4 is to see if you get the idea. Basically, did you learn what you were supposed to learn? So I'm trying to make you do a prediction. That means do this before you graph the problem, and then you can graph it and see if you thought about it correctly. Okay, now you'll do that for each of the remaining 6 graphs, and that'll help you to fill out your chart, and then that'll help you to work on your homework.